and you're very welcome back to the Public Eye Podcast, a 6-part series of podcasts brought to you by Granite Exchange. I'm your host, Sarah Travers, and throughout this series, I'm speaking with local entrepreneurs and business owners to learn more about how these companies have come to be, gain insight into their growth, and find out how they continue to innovate. So wherever you get your podcasts from, remember to keep an eye out for new episodes and subscribe to stay up to date. So who's my guest today? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Brendan Carty, founder of Killowen Distillery. Brendan, you're very welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Great to be here.
Well, before we begin, I'm going to give you a tiny bit of background on Killowen Distillery before we get into the conversation. Located in the very heart of the beautiful Mournes, Killowen Distillery combines age-old traditions with the finest natural resources, creating an authentic and unique world-class spirit. Using handmade artisan stills, fondly known as Christor and Brock, Killowen Distillery have ensured that their spirits are a fitting tribute to the techniques of a bygone era. It sounds so romantic and takes me back to the mists of time, but how did it all start, Brendan?
The distillery itself it came from an idea, I suppose. In a previous life, I was an architect. I became chartered during the crash, and I was working 2 days a week. It just wasn't sustainable. And unfortunately, I had moved overseas, and I moved to Australia. Was working there, some beautiful buildings, some amazing companies and people. I really enjoyed my time there. But while I was out there, I was still, enjoying Irish whiskey, and I was also enjoying some Australian whiskies. And I tasted a whiskey out there that I thought was just as good as the best of Irish whiskey. However, it was much younger. In fact, it was just over 2 years old. You're allowed to be a 2-year-old whiskey out there. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go down and visit this place in Tasmania. I went down and visited it, and I thought, I think I have to do this.
Really? So you've always had that big an interest in spirits, in whiskey?
Yeah, definitely. In particular, pot still whiskey. Even from a young age, I used to steal a nip of my dad's Powers whiskey, for instance, and he'd let you have a wee sip, and you had this real lovely taste in it, and I didn't understand what that was. It's a blended whiskey, but it's got a very high pot still content in that blend, and that's what I realised was the enjoyable part of it, was those pot still spices. So yeah, it's something I've always chased ever since.
So you'll have to forgive my ignorance. So if there's anybody else like me out there, let's have a little bit of a crash course in the different types of whiskey. So pot still whiskey, what's that?
Pot still whiskey is Irish whiskey. It's the daddy of all Irish whiskies. It's bold, it's complex, it's full-bodied. In fact, before the boom of Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey was king throughout the whole world. Irish whiskey was the whiskey of choice amongst the whole of the British Empire, the British aristocrats, amongst the whole of the Americas. It fell out of fashion for political reasons and all other reasons, economic warfare between Ireland and the UK, and also prohibition in the States, Second World War, all these things. There was also pot still. It was also this purity that we also always wanted to go for pot still over blends, which ended up blends are more economical, and we lost out when the hard times came. But the thing about pot still whiskey is how it's made. So the Scots are famed for their single malts, the Irish are famed for pot still whiskey. Single malt means the mash bill, which is the recipe for a single malt, is 100% malted barley. Irish whiskey, however, contained malted barley, unmalted barley, oats, rye, and wheat. So you created your own recipes. So it ended up, whenever you add oat, rye, and wheat in there, you get much more beautiful flavours, spicy flavours, mouthfeel, character, body in your whiskey. A far more interesting whiskey when it's done right.
I can see your passion for what you've chosen to do. So you're still in Australia, you think, I'm going to do this. What happened next?
It was time to come home, but by the time it was time to come home, I always had a business plan drawn up, and I spoke to, two very interesting colleagues, Shane McCarthy and Liam Brogan, who went to school with me in St Coleman's College in Uri here. 2 guys from Hilltown who had another company set up called Ireland Craft Beverages. They were basically exporting the best of our locally made produce abroad because there isn't a good market here. It's a very monopolised industry, particularly in the north. So these guys were doing a stunning job telling the world about craft produce. So they knew the ins and the outs of the alcohol industry. They also knew about buying and selling, and they had the backbone as well to get a business set up. So that definitely helped. So the three of us set up the Cologne distillery together. In the meantime as well, I was still working as an architect for the local firm, Milligan Reside Larkin in Uri here. It was a fantastic outfit. So that continued for a couple of years as well.
Well, that's what they always say. You have to have something else. You have a bit of a side hustle until you can go on your own, out on your own. What about your family? What did they make of what you were doing?
People thought you were mad, you know, especially a career that you worked, you know, so long and hard for, 7.5 years in university, scraping and being broke, working extremely long hours, sitting up all night making models and designs and studying for exams, legal exams at the end. And I didn't throw away that career, but I still enjoy it as a hobby. But
you've swapped them over now, so that the architecture's become your hobby. But maybe your family are going, "Are you crazy?"
They did, and friends of the family, and trusted relatives, trusted friends. But
it's worked out okay, though, hasn't it?
So far, so good. Yeah,
so
it definitely has.
How long ago was that then?
So that would have been then about 3 years ago. Because although all the work was done in the background, you were working away subconsciously in this business and still working as an architect, and you were living two lives. You didn't know what to do, and then eventually, about 3 years ago, you just took the jump.
And what did that jump involve?
Jump involved just I don't know, a realization that I'm going to leave my current job and go full time into the distillery.
Did you feel nervous?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Very frightening. You didn't have the full support and confidence of all your friends and family, and there's also so there's other people to consider when you're doing this. So there was that in the back of your mind. You were worried for other people's sake.
But it was a risk worth taking. Now, you needed a location for this. Tell me a bit about where you are located, because it sounds idyllic. What's it like?
Beautiful location. There's a wonderful townland called Kilfagan, or Kilfahan, as the locals would call it. And it's nestled between two mountains in the Mournes, Formal and Knockshee. Knockshee, basically the Irish for, Cruckshee, the hill of the fairies. There's lots of lore and tradition around the area. Overlooking the Irish Sea in Carlingford Lough, in the Mournes. It's got its own little microclimate, fluctuating temperatures, perfect for aging whiskey. It's a very tight rural lane. It's difficult to get lorries up and down for deliveries and collections, but we make do. It's Ireland's smallest distillery, and it's got this tremendous group of followers, people who have been following us from day on, and it's growing. They call themselves the Cologne cult, in fact, and they set themselves up, and we've given them our blessing, and they've worked wonders for us.
So social media has been fantastic.
Social media as well, yeah, and supporters have basically organised themselves in social media for us, which is great.
So when you started the whole distilling process, what did you actually need in your small distillery?
HMRC approval.
Right.
Which is the main thing, because HMRC police alcohol very tightly.
Yes.
It's not the most interesting thing in the world. It's not like talking about mash bills and flavours, but it's so important. It's a bond. They see that as storing alcohol is storing their money. So once alcohol leaves our premises, £28.40 per litre of alcohol needs to be paid directly to the government, plus VAT on top of that. It's a lot of dough. So they need to see that as secure. So there's a lot of checks. They keep a lot of records. They also carry out checks and visits, investigations if anything goes wrong. Security is paramount. Cameras, burglar alarms, double doors, metal doors,
Good Lord,
window
really?
protection, all these things. So this is a bond. So we had to get expertise in that matter. So there's a local lady from the Dublin Road here in Uri, Anita Farmer. She basically would be the expert for the region in that area, and we got our approvals in record time thanks to her expertise. So if anybody needs to set up a distillery, you need an Anita Farmer to do that.
You need Anita. Well, there's such a great history of distilling, though, in this part of the world, and it's really having something of a renaissance.
Yeah, it is indeed. In fact, there's a regionalism starting to emerge in Irish whiskey. You've got the Cork contingent, that the beautiful Middleton and those pot stills that are owned by Pernod Ricard. And then you've got West Cork, which is an independent distillery further out, which is another beast of a distillery, two giant distilleries. And then in County Down, I think there's more distilleries in County Down than any other county in Ireland.
Yeah.
And they've all got their own different accents and dialects. Acklandville Distillery, for instance, just over the other side of Strangford, southeast down. They're amazing people over there, and they've been about now for a long time. The whiskies they're producing are fantastic too. And right here in Uri, Matt Darcy's, for instance, it just goes on and on.
So whenever we are able to get up and running and travel again, I mean, I would imagine that, there's a huge world out there and so many whiskey drinkers. Maybe County Down can be, bringing the tourists here on that whiskey trail.
I agree. Yeah, if you look to Scotland, for instance, there's Speyside, there's Islay, Highland, Lowland, all these different regions in their whiskey. Tasmania itself has a massive tourism industry. We're actually I'm part of a tourism group here called Visit Mourne. So Tracy Mooney's heading that up from the Newry Council, and there's a lot of different businesses joined together for tourism to boost this as a tourist region, and it ties in the Mourne and Gullion region as well. And I think once it opens up, as you say, this region will explode for quality tourism, high-end tourism, and that's what we want.
It's so exciting. Now, tell me about actually producing the spirits, because, at what point can you actually sell the spirit that you've been making over the last number of years?
Yeah, we've about 1 year to go until our own spirit is actually called whiskey, and we've had our spirits tasted by some of the most respected palates in the industry, and they've been saying wonderful things.
Oh, wow. What have they been saying?
I don't want to sort of big ourselves up because we do. They're still quite anxious about the whole thing, but yeah, they're basically saying that it's tasting amazing. We're making Irish whiskey the way it was made, the way it should be made. It's bold, it's full-bodied, it's complex. None of the three myths of Irish whiskey that you might hear in marketing. When Irish whiskey had to survive, they told the three lies that Irish whiskey's always triple distilled, smooth, and non-peated.
You're saying that's a lie?
Irish whiskey became triple distilled, yes. And we had to market ourselves as something to survive, and smooth Irish whiskey seemed to fill that void and keep us alive for a while.
But that's what we hear all the time when you think about Irish whiskey. So what are you saying then?
If you talk to our grandparents and they would have spoke fondly of pot still Irish whiskey, they would have said there was eating and drinking in it. Bold, full-bodied, spicy stuff. You could chew on it. That's because of the oat in there. And whenever you use pot still spice, there was a lot of spice in there as well. And it was bloody peated as much as it was unpeated. Peated whiskey in Ireland, it isn't just a new phenomena. So Cologne's making peated pot still Irish whiskey with old school mash bills, extra oat, rye and wheat, as well as malted barley and unmalted barley. These all create, for instance, unmalted barley creates pepper, malted barley gives this lovely honey sweet note, rye creates its own spice, ginger, oat is like cream and mouthfeel. It's like cooking with oil and not cooking with oil. When you don't cook with oil, you don't make nice food. When you do cook with oil, you make lovely food. Oat is the oil. And if there's oil in your palate, the flavours stay there for longer. And that's what pot still is all about.
I don't think I've ever interviewed anybody about alcohol or spirits, and I actually felt hungry. I want to sample some of these. Tell me about the artisan stills that you have, and you've got names for them.
Yeah, so there's two stills. They're flame fed. At the time, I think there's another one or two distilleries in Ireland now with flame under their stills, but we were the first people to bring that back.
Wow.
Using fire under a still is a difficult thing to get past, your health and safety issues, but when you do it safely and do it right, it's good. In fact, it's amazing because when you use fire under the still, it burns at the base of the still and creates a chemical process known as a Maillard reaction. Any chefs out there or studied culinary backgrounds, they would know what that means. Maillard reaction is when amino acids and sugars char at the base of the still and create a caramelization, and it adds another layer of dimension of flavour to the whiskey. So we also use worm tub condensers. They fell out of fashion in the 60s because they're highly inefficient. So our stills are running for far longer than they need to. We should be running them maybe on a 6-hour shift instead. We would need to run them over 12 hours to create a beautiful spirit. So that's another. The worm tub makes a much more bold, full-bodied spirit. The two names are interesting because Brock is a fun name. Brock just comes from badger, the Irish for badger. There's a lot of badgers around Kilfechan, and it's quite low set and solid, and it reminded us of a badger. And then Creastor is a bigger still. It's the wash still. It's 1,000 litres. So we just named it aptly after an important young man who died actually 3 years ago this month from the local area, and he was very fondly connected to the Franklin family, who we lease the shed off as a long-term lease. So there's a nice connection there with that name, Creekstore being the Irish for Christopher. So
That's
yeah.
lovely. This is really like a masterclass for pot still whiskey distilling. I'm jotting all of these words down that I've never even heard before, and learning about things like the Maillard reaction and flame fired. But this podcast is sponsored by Granite Legal Services, a niche business and immigration law practice located in the heart of Newry City. Granite Legal Services provides legal advice to both individuals and companies alike across a wide range of industries, from employment, commercial or corporate law matters to immigration law. Granite Legal Services focuses on providing legally sound, practical advice to its clients. To get in touch, visit www.granitelegalservices.co.uk or contact 028 3026 2200. So, as a business model then, when you open a distillery, but you can't actually sell your whiskey until it becomes whiskey for 3 years, you've got to make some money. So what are you selling in the meantime?
Yeah, three main things. Gin has been going very well. Native botanicals picked from the Mourne Mountains. The other one was bonded whiskey. So we buy in whiskey, we put it in creative casks. We tell people we blend different whiskies together, which hadn't been done before, from further up north and further down south, and put them into 3 different blends, put them in a range of casks, send them out to people without any dilution or any filtration and no added colour. So these integrity things and all the information on the label just generated this cult following that we have today.
Wow.
And aside from that, then there's another amazing spirit that's been overlooked in Ireland, our own native spirit that came before whiskey, poaching.
Oh my goodness, you're making poaching.
Poaching, yeah.
Are you allowed to make poaching?
Yeah, they say poaching was made illegal in 1661 with the formation of excise duty under conquest, and in 1987 it became protected with a technical file protecting it that said that it can be that there are certain strings attached to making it, so it became legalised. But it was this technical file, like the whiskey technical file, was written by people who presumed to own the category and seen poaching as a threat to whiskey. And it's basically a corruption. I don't mind saying it. We get in trouble for these things all the time, but it was. And so the law for poaching needs changed. Poaching had a fondness. The word poaching itself means little pot, but like any of the old Irish words with "een" at the end, like mowerning or bodging, it has a fondness to it. So everybody had a pot in the community when they were making poaching back in the day, and poaching was made nice. It was beautiful spirit. But whenever you're forced into the hills and glens to make it in the back of, using secondary hand equipment or whatever, poor equipment, you're going to make poor poachings. And unfortunately, it's got a bad name. But poaching, when it's made well, is an amazing produce. And it is the unsung hero of Irish distillation, and we should be promoting it for ourselves and worldwide and enjoying that.
So you have really, stumbled across something that could be our best kept secret. Now, from my experience of poaching, which is very, very limited, I remember trying a little sample of something. It was quite strong.
Yeah, it can be. And not cut well, maybe, and not diluted slightly. And the cuts are important in distillation. The first bit you get out of your distillation, you should be discarding that. That's methanol. Methanol creates blindness in a best case situation.
Oh my goodness, that explains a lot.
Yeah, otherwise liver failure or worse. So you need to be very skilled. What you do with that. Some people will put that back into the poaching, not realising, and things can go wrong. So you can wake up with a very bad headache.
Yeah. So how can you regulate that? I mean, there could be people listening to this going, seriously? I'm allowed to purchase poaching, but they might be apprehensive about what might happen.
Yeah, but if it's made in a registered place, the HMRC have done their checks, you know what you're doing. There's also health and safety checks done for, food production facilities, and any good poachings are made. People know what they're doing. And
so here's another thing. Is this a myth? Is it made from potatoes?
It is a myth. Yeah.
That's a myth.
There might have been a little bit of potato used, but if you think potato, although they're a massive part of the Irish diet, potato is a newcomer to Ireland. Around the Victorian times, it was, capitalised with their laissez-faire economics, and potato is a stranger. It's a Peruvian vegetable root. It came here quite recently, if we think about it.
Gosh.
Poaching predates the potato. We made poaching, and we still do to this day, from grain, from oats, rye, wheat. Basically, it's an unaged pot still whiskey.
I'm sure people are loving listening to this. Honestly, it is so interesting. And how's the poaching going down then with your customers?
A treat, it really is. So at the start of March now, we just released our Cougar range poaching, which sold out very quickly. We didn't expect it. It sold out in about 3 or 4 minutes.
And how long does it take to produce a bottle?
The ridiculous rules around poaching state that you can only leave it in a cask for 10 weeks, but you don't have to put it in a cask at all. So it could just take anything, maybe just over a week to produce.
Right.
It could.
And where are your customers coming from then? Where are you selling?
Well, it was great. There was a set of our poaching just arrived in Australia today. There was 5 arrived in the USA yesterday. It was nice to see most of them around the Republic of Ireland and the north here. And then there's around mainland United Kingdom as well. Germany, we've good trading partners in Germany as well. So we're about to go out to the States now very soon. So yeah, there's growth, and it's sustainable growth. It's not just exploding. We're also keeping our heads when we're doing it.
How has the past year been for you?
It was tricky. It was insane. There was a bit of disruption, with COVID and that. We did miss the closing down of the pubs. Was a massive kick, but we ploughed on with our plans. We released a whiskey. Nobody was releasing whiskey at the time. Everybody just stopped. All the big companies stopped. All the small, nobody released anything. It just went quiet, and we were like, "What are people doing?" So we went and released a whiskey, sent samples out to all of the most interesting people in the whiskey industry, and also to some influencers as well, if you like. And there was a whiskey. People were at home. Whiskey fanatics were at home with no whiskey to drink. So they had nothing to talk about, and luckily Cologne exploded onto the stage with another whiskey, and everybody had something to talk about. And then I got on a few podcasts with my controversial views and called a few groups and organisations out who have legal influence, and I suppose people got to know what Cologne was about, and they got to understand her personality and the quality of her spirit then very quickly. And this was a bonded experimental series with that whiskey that I'm talking about, and luckily that worked for us.
So what is the whiskey industry like? What's it like being the new kid on the block? Is it welcoming?
Yeah, there's a lot of camaraderie. Thankfully, it's full of interesting people with the best of intentions at heart. There's a lot of women coming on board now as well. It's nowhere near balanced. That's still very much out of balance, but it's moving in the right direction. People have the best of interests at heart, and there's actually this underground network of people, you would not believe it, sending samples of whiskey to each other around the country, the UK, Iceland, around the world, the USA. Basically, if you buy a bottle of whiskey and you want to taste it, and they sell out fast, people split their bottles up, pour them out into miniature bottles, and my house is probably coming down with miniature bottles from
right?
buying my own, shipping them out to other people and receiving them from other people. It's just this wonderful community of people looking out for each other.
And is everybody wanting to try new things? I would have thought that you very much had the whiskey that you loved and you stuck to that, especially when it comes to where you get your whiskey from. But you're saying, a bit like with the gin fanatics, they're loving to try new flavours, new tonics, new way of of drinking it. Is it the same in the world of whiskey?
It's probably the same, a lot more, 10 times more.
Is that right?
Experimental. Everybody wants to try everything, and
see, I don't even like whiskey. Isn't that awful? I feel like I'm going to have to start learning.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to somebody who's not an accomplished whiskey drinker if they were beginning?
I would say everybody likes whiskey. They just don't know that they do. So there's a lovely one coming out now, a 40% whiskey, the 1808 that I tasted last night from Ecklandville. It's a nice blend. It's 40%. It's very mellow. It's a nice little blend. I would recommend trying it.
And how do you have your whiskey?
If I was not used to drinking whiskey, I would drink it. You can have it with ice. You can have it with a little bit of lemonade if you want, or even sparkling water. Me personally, I just drink it neat. No water, no ice. If you put ice in it, you lose those flavours. But if you're just starting into whiskey, there's no rules. Don't be listening to whiskey snobs telling you you have to drink it this way, you have to drink it that way.
So I often wondered, you know, if you worked with spirits and whiskey all of the time, a bit like if you're a chocolatier, you get to the point where it's work, so you're smelling, you're tasting, but you're not maybe choosing to sit down with that tipple in the evening. Is it the same for you? Because you know you're surrounded by it all day that you think the last thing I want now is a wee dram.
Do you know what? Yeah, last week I actually felt like that. I was just sick of the sight of because I was exhausted. We had just done the release, and there was a lot of tastings going on, and I was thinking, but that only lasted for a day. The end of the next evening, I was like, right, finished work now. What will I have for my wind down? And I looked around, you know, and got a nice little whiskey and sat down, and that's it. Then you can relax for the evening.
Do you being in the drinks industry as well? Do you have a sense of responsibility around, you know, selling alcohol, because there are people out there that you know, do have problems, and do you feel that industry needs to be regulated more to help people?
I think there's a very good point there. Thankfully, when you're in the premium whiskey industry, you're not selling to abusers to the same extent as you would be if you're selling, you know, real budget alcohol. In Scotland, they made some good initiatives there in recent years to increase the price of, you know, very poor quality sort of drinks, and I know that looks like a bad move in a way, because it looks like it's a tax on the poorest of society, and I'd consider myself very socially aware, but in all, it didn't seem to work out that way, you know. So it just meant people started to buy less. Thankfully, in Scotland, it was a risky experiment. It was quite controversial at the time, so maybe they could bring that in here. But I think with premium quality spirits, they don't impact problem drinkers.
Okay.
So that's luckily enough.
Can I go back to the poaching, because I can't let that go. How do you drink poaching?
The same for me personally. The same as you drink whiskey. But there's a bar in Dublin that was set up about 4 years ago to just with poaching in mind. It's called 1661, named after the date of formation of excise in Ireland. 1661 has all the poachings in the country in that bar. It's well worth a visit. It's an amazing bar.
Is it an aperitif, or is it at the end of the evening in the armchair winding down?
They all taste different. So there's different whiskies. Some are dry, some are sweet, some are spicy, some are peated, like the one we released very recently. It's like a real turf fire in it, you know, that's what it's like. So so whatever your cup of tea is, it's about experimenting, but they're great in cocktails. We use our poaching we call it a clone coffee. You basically put it in an Irish coffee instead of your whiskey.
No, I like the sound of that.
Whereas, Ban down, they put theirs into, they call it a Belfast coffee. When they put it in a chilled coffee, a cold brew coffee with a little bit of nutmeg on top. Works perfectly as well. So those are just two examples using coffee. But any whiskey cocktail, if you replace the whiskey with a poaching, it's just lovely. An old fashioned, for instance.
And what do the family think now?
They're happy enough. They get to see. They obviously see the method in the madness now. But everything's going well.
It sounds really exciting. So how do you get away from work? It sounds pretty full on at the minute. But what do you do to unwind?
Yeah, there's you can't get away from it, unfortunately, especially with the lockdown as it is. You know, you used to be able to at least travel with work down south, but that's not going to happen. But the Mourne Mountains are on our doorstep, and last May I just rediscovered the Mournes and took a hike around the mountains. Done the Mourne Wall Challenge. The Mournes are there now, so every weekend, every Sunday, we walked up a couple of mountains last Sunday. So yeah, that's
sure, you live in the most beautiful part of the world.
It's
and
nice.
Being a County Down native, how important is it that you can live and work at home, especially when you've travelled and you've been in other places? How important is it to be home?
It's every time when you're away, all you do is compare things to home. Think about home. Think about the family. You know where you come from. Yeah, there's nowhere like it. And then when you come back and you look at Carlingford Lough, the Coolies and the Mournes, they're up there with any of the scenes you might have seen around America or Australia. You know, everywhere's beautiful in its own right, but this part of the north just punches way above its weight. It really does, and it's a hidden gem for tourism. And I don't know if we should open it up. Maybe we keep it all to ourselves, you know. But it's only a matter of time. People are going to come here, and the Visit Mourne is going to, as a tourist destination, is going to explode.
And you will be part of that tourism offering?
We already are. There's a fantastic core group of businesses there now that are really pushing that. It spans from Gullion, Newry, over to Downpatrick, and then to Strangford. And you want to see what we have to offer. It is brilliant, you know.
Yeah, we're ready. We're ready for you.
Yeah,
absolutely. Now, the purpose of this podcast, Brendan, is to inspire existing business owners and ambitious entrepreneurs to grow their business by offering insight into the success of companies such as your own at Killowen Distillery. But what advice would you give to people who may have that idea but have no idea where to begin or unsure as to whether or not that risk is worth taking? And I'm glad I'm asking you that question because you've taken a risk.
Yeah. God, it was a tough one, especially when I had worked so hard on an existing career. But life's fluid, you know, and sometimes you think that don't worry about what other people think as much. I suppose you just have to go for it. Have a bit of confidence, and God, I don't even think I had confidence. I think it was just happening, and I got myself deeper and deeper, and I had to keep going. But yeah, just talk to your friends and talk to your family and talk to somebody who's done it before. Don't rely too much on any organisations that pretend to have small businesses.
Right, so you didn't have a good experience with support?
I don't think so. Not yet anyway. Maybe in time. I think they're designed to help big business, is my opinion, which is probably the issue with society today. But yeah, there's not. So
were there
support.
a lot of naysayers?
Yeah, people looking at you like you're mad, and they sort of would laugh, and you remember it now, and it makes it so much more motivating when people think that it's not a good idea, or when they sort of write you off at an early stage, and just lump you in. Even some good friends have done it, and it just makes it so much more motivating because you can just sit back now and go, right, it's actually still working. There's a lot of challenges ahead. We're still a young company, not all out of the woods yet, but at the same time.
So was it just thranness that kept you going, do you think?
I think so. It definitely was. It's a motivating factor. And
and it's paid off.
Shane McCarthy and Liam Brogan, and their success of their own company as well. And all companies have challenges, but the guys that put out their support as well, just that, it does help.
You had somebody who had your back. You had two guys who had your back, and that was great.
Yeah, they had, I think, one thing they had was confidence anyway, and that was great,
Okay, well, great advice then if anybody's listening. So a bit of thranness and some confidence to keep going.
Yeah, and even if it's not your own confidence, just have borrowed confidence from somebody else. It's just as good.
Love it.
Yeah.
Brendan Carty, founder of Killowen Distillery, thank you so much for being my guest on the Public Eye podcast.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thanks, folks, also for joining us wherever you are, and join me for the next episode coming up soon. This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.